Most likely, you're already using Windows 11, and although it may seem like it was your decision, for many people, it wasn't. The only alternative was to switch to Windows 11, or lose support. And the thing is, over the last 3 years, Microsoft has been constantly pushing this change through invasive advertising. That's where the question comes in. What's behind Microsoft's insistence on moving everyone to Windows 11? Well, for years, Windows worked under a fairly simple logic. The user decided when to change their operating system, and it seemed like everything was under our control, or at least that's how it appeared. I say this because the transition from Windows 10 to Windows 11 ended up becoming a very lucrative business for Microsoft, and we were the guinea pigs.
How about that one?
That technology is 3 months old. Only suckers buy out-of-date machines.
And the thing is, over time, you learn to recognize when a change is truly worth it. This situation happened to me a few years ago when I was using Windows XP. Here's the thing, I didn't switch to Windows Vista because it felt like a bad operating system in terms of performance, but I did switch when Windows 7 came along, which for me is one of the best operating systems Microsoft has ever released. For a long time, choosing felt like a natural part of using Windows. The same thing happened to me with Windows 7. At first, I didn't switch to Windows 8, but I did voluntarily move to Windows 10 by my own decision, and I'm sure more than a few people went through the same thing.
Oh, this industry moves so fast, it's really hard to tell.
There came a point when switching to Windows 10 felt like the right decision. Up to that point, everything was fine. The choice was up to the user, and there were options to choose from. But what came next changed the way many users thought. With Windows 10, a lot of us were comfortable and felt at ease, but little by little, something started to feel off. The first warning sign was obvious. When you wanted to modernize and leave Windows 10 behind, you realized there wasn't a second option. Either you moved to Windows 11 or you moved to Windows 11. It was no mystery to anyone what was coming. These minimum requirements would affect a lot of users with modest hardware, computers that up until that point had worked just fine with Windows 10, but clearly wouldn't be able to do the same with Windows 11. In the end, beyond the requirements and the warnings, the excitement of something new won out, and many of us, myself included, made the jump to Windows 11.
$5,000?
And by now, we all know how Windows 11 turned out in its first few months. Over time, the bugs in this new operating system started to pile up, and that made many of us want to go back to Windows 10 while we waited for Microsoft's next operating system. At that point, many of us were putting our hopes on something called Windows 12, as if it were the natural way out of this situation. However, so far, Windows 12 hasn't gone beyond being an idea within the community. As of now, there's no official alternative, and it doesn't look like Microsoft plans to offer one anytime soon. Today, whether we like it or not, we're stuck with Windows 11. Even so, the most worrying part is that Windows 11 is still struggling with update issues that affect tons of users. By this same stage, Windows 10 was already a rock-solid, stable system. The community's solution to the first problem Microsoft threw at us was to do absolutely nothing. Yes, exactly what you're hearing, nothing at all. We were determined to stay on Windows 10. It was a stable, efficient operating system that many of us wanted to keep using, but the monster wasn't going to sit still. When Microsoft realized that many people weren't planning to move, the second problem showed up.
Must be something I can do about this. Wait.
Microsoft launched an aggressive campaign to push the move from Windows 10 to Windows 11. And this wasn't just any campaign. It was persistent, direct, and hard to ignore. Those persistent messages showed up almost every time you restarted your computer, telling you that your device was ready to switch to Windows 11. They became so annoying that Microsoft itself had to cut them down to once a month to avoid bad press on Twitter, or X, whatever it's called these days. But that urgency was already starting to raise suspicion within the community. Persistent messages, more and more frequent notifications, and a strange feeling that Windows 10 was starting to degrade, becoming slower. More and more users started to feel that Windows 10 wasn't performing like it used to, and it wasn't just a feeling. Some updates came with certain Microsoft tricks that made users feel like they had to make the jump to Windows 11.
I guess I'll take that one.
Well, do you need a paperweight? Because if you buy that machine, that's all you're gonna have, is an expensive paperweight.
This is where the real problem starts. Microsoft wanted everyone to feel like switching to Windows 11 was urgent and necessary, when it really wasn't, almost as if it knew something we didn't, or as if this change benefited Microsoft in some way. The goal was obvious. It wasn't about offering a better experience with the hardware people already had, but about pushing them to buy a new device or upgrade their hardware. And this is where the story takes a turn. Little by little, we started losing control and the freedom to choose which operating system to use, all because of Microsoft's constant pressure to push a single operating system called Windows 11. The change Microsoft was pushing so urgently left a large number of Windows 10 users out of its new Windows 11 proposal, not because these users didn't want to upgrade, but because many of them simply couldn't. Their devices didn't meet the minimum requirements for Windows 11. And that's where the first real break with the community began. In short, Microsoft's narrative fell apart. It could no longer tell you that Windows 11 was so good you'd want to upgrade because many people couldn't even do it. That's when the message about upgrading to Windows 11 stopped working. Users were seeing errors, restrictions, and obvious problems in Windows 11. Even the idea that Windows 11 was better started to wear thin and lost credibility across forums and social media. So Microsoft's approach changed. Instead of trying to convince users, it started to push them. Invasive ads came back, showing up more and more often as soon as you booted into Windows 10, even when your device didn't even meet the requirements to upgrade. That's when things started to feel off. The community began to ask why Microsoft was in such a huge rush, even if it meant leaving millions of users stranded without a supported operating system. That's when many people started to suspect that something was being planned behind the scenes. Microsoft didn't care that Windows 10 worked perfectly fine on less modern hardware. It didn't seem to matter either that Windows 11 performed worse and had a bad image. The only thing that mattered was getting more and more people to stop using Windows 10, no matter the cost. That could only mean one thing. Many users, simply because they didn't meet the requirements, had to buy a new device or replace hardware that was still working perfectly fine. And that's where the deals between Microsoft and hardware manufacturers start to add up. What if the business behind all of this was an agreement with certain hardware manufacturers? In short, Windows 11 stopped being just an operating system and turned into a business strategy, where modest hardware was no longer enough, and replacing it became the new business for Microsoft and its partners. As we all know, low-spec computers already ran Windows 10 without problems, and Linux worked just as well, so there wasn't really any need to upgrade hardware back then. That's why many users chose to stick with Windows 10 until the very end of its support, waiting for an alternative to Windows 11, or at least a meaningful improvement, but that alternative never came. In my case, I upgraded my main computer to Windows 11 because it had the required hardware, but on my other two laptops I ended up running Linux Mint. Not because I wanted to change, but because there was no real alternative and I simply wasn't going to buy new components just to keep them going. And even though I'm happy with that decision today, it wasn't really a free choice. It was a decision driven by Microsoft's aggressive business strategy. At first, I saw all of this as a bad thing, since I've always been a Windows user. But today, I don't regret it at all, because these Microsoft strategies finally gave me the chance to try Linux for the first time. Even though many users are still on Windows 10, it won't be like that forever. Eventually, they'll have to make a choice, either accept the rules Microsoft is imposing or switch to Linux as an alternative.